The night sky over Silverfang was clear and silver, as if the moon itself had polished every star for the occasion. Torches lined the path to the moon shrine, an ancient circle of white stone that had stood for centuries, waiting for one night each generation when the moon goddess would choose a bride for the reigning Alpha King. Tonight, that king was Draven Ashcombe, and the entire pack believed they already knew who she would choose. Lady Seraphina Voss stood at the center of the shrine, dressed in a gown the color of moonlight, her dark hair braided with silver thread. She had been raised for this moment since she could walk. Her family had spent years forging alliances, teaching her the old songs, and reminding her, again and again, that she was destined to become Luna of Silverfang. Tonight, she believed, was simply the formality that would make it official. Draven stood across from her, tall and composed, his expression unreadable as always. He was a king who had learned early that emotion was a weakness others could use against him. His father had taught him that trust was a door, and doors could be broken into. So Draven kept his closed, even now, even here, on the night he was supposed to receive his fated mate. The head priestess, an elderly woman named Mother Ellen, raised her arms toward the moon. The pack fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "Goddess of the silver light," Mother Ellen called, her voice steady despite her age, "reveal to your king the one true heart bound to his own." A soft glow spread across the shrine floor, gathering like mist, curling toward Seraphina. The crowd leaned forward. Seraphina lifted her chin, ready. But the light did not stop at her. It slid past her outstretched hand, drifting through the gathered crowd like a living thing searching for something it already knew. Confused murmurs rippled through the pack. Seraphina's smile faltered, and then the light found its target, a servant girl near the back, half hidden behind broader shoulders, clutching a tray she had been carrying only moments before. Her name was Wren Calloway. The light wrapped around her wrist and rose to her palm, where a mark bloomed instantly, a crescent moon, silver and glowing, exactly like the one carved into the shrine stones. Wren stared at her own hand as though it belonged to someone else. The tray slipped from her fingers and shattered against the ground, but no one heard it. Every eye in the shrine was fixed on her. "That's impossible," Seraphina whispered, her voice cracking through the silence. "The goddess does not make mistakes." But there it was, unmistakable and glowing, a truth no one could deny and no one wanted to believe. Wren was not raised for this. She had grown up in the kitchens of the pack house, an orphan taken in as a small child by the kindness of the palace cook. She scrubbed floors, carried firewood, and had never once imagined herself standing anywhere near the Alpha King, let alone bound to him by moonlight. Now, with every pair of eyes locked on her, she felt smaller than she ever had in her life. "There must be an error," Seraphina's father shouted, stepping forward, his voice sharp with barely controlled panic. "Redo the ceremony. The girl probably wandered too close. Some trick of the light." "The goddess does not make errors, Lord Voss," Mother Ellen said quietly, though her own eyes were wide with surprise. She marked who she marked. Wren wanted to disappear. She stepped back, shaking her head. "I don't understand." "I'm no one. I'm not meant for this." Draven had not moved. He stood perfectly still, watching the mark glow on the servant girl's palm, watching the chaos erupt around him, and feeling something twist deep inside his chest. Not longing, not joy, but suspicion. In his experience, powerful families did not lose gracefully, and coincidences, this convenient, rarely existed without someone pulling the strings behind them. He stepped forward, silencing the crowd with nothing more than his presence. "I will not complete the binding tonight," he said. Gasps spread through the shrine. Mother Ellen turned to him, startled. "My king, to refuse the goddess's choice is—" "I am not refusing the goddess," Draven said, his voice low but firm. "I am refusing to be rushed into something I do not yet understand." This mark appeared in front of an audience gathered specifically to expect a different outcome. "I will not bind myself to anyone until I know why." He turned and walked away without looking at either woman, leaving behind a shrine full of stunned faces, a humiliated noble family, and a servant girl standing alone with a glowing mark she never asked for. Wren did not sleep that night. She sat in the small room she shared with two other kitchen girls, staring at her palm, which still carried the faint outline of the crescent even hours later. She did not know what frightened her more, the mark itself, or the way the king had looked at her, as if she were a puzzle he intended to solve, rather than a person he might one day care for. By morning, whispers had already spread through every corridor of the pack house. Some servants regarded her with a strange kind of awe, others with jealousy sharp enough to cut. But it was the fear in Serafina Voss's eyes, glimpsed briefly across the courtyard, that stayed with Wren the longest. She understood, without needing to be told, that she had made a very dangerous enemy without doing anything at all. Draven, meanwhile, called his beta, Callum, into his study before the sun had fully risen. "Something about last night does not sit right with me," Draven said, pacing before the fireplace. The mark appeared too conveniently, in front of the one family, with everything to lose if it appeared elsewhere. "You think the Voss family arranged it somehow?" Callum asked, frowning. "Marks from the moon goddess cannot be faked, Draven, not even by the oldest bloodlines." "Then I want to know why a servant girl carries power strong enough to draw the goddess's attention in the first place," Draven said. "Look into her past, quietly." It did not take long for Callum to uncover something strange. Wren's parents had died when she was only 3 years old, in a fire that destroyed nearly every record of her family's origin. But buried in the old pack archives, in a section rarely visited, Callum found fragments of a name that matched her mother's, a name belonging to a nearly extinct lunar bloodline, one that had once produced priestesses gifted with a rare closeness to the goddess herself. The bloodline had been thought lost for generations. When Callum brought the information to Draven, the king said nothing for a long moment, simply staring into the fire. "She is not an accident," Draven finally said. "The goddess chose exactly who she meant to choose." But knowing the truth and acting on it were two very different things, and Draven was not a man who moved quickly once his guard was up. Over the following days, Wren tried to return to her normal life, though normal no longer seemed to exist for her. She was pulled from her kitchen duties and given a small room closer to the main house, a decision made by the king's staff without any explanation offered to her. She barely saw Draven at all, though she often felt eyes on her when she walked the halls, silent guards positioned just a little too carefully near wherever she happened to be. She did not know that Draven had ordered her protection the very morning after the ceremony, unwilling to leave her exposed while the Voss family's intentions remained unclear. Serafina, humiliated and desperate, grew colder with each passing day. Her father, refusing to accept the loss of what he considered his family's rightful place, began meeting in secret with old allies, searching for any way to remove the obstacle standing between his daughter and the throne. He told himself it was for the good of the pack, that a servant girl with no training could never rule beside a king. He told himself many things to justify what came next. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after the ceremony, Wren was asked to deliver a message to the Eastern Gate, a task assigned by a new attendant she did not recognize. She thought nothing of it, grateful for something familiar to do with her hands. But as she reached the quiet path near the old stables, 3 men stepped out from the shadows, their intentions clear in the way they moved, to block every direction she might run. Wren's heart slammed against her ribs. She had no training, no weapon, nothing but instinct telling her to scream. She never had the chance. A low growl tore through the darkness before she could make a sound, and Draven's wolf form crashed into the nearest attacker with a force that sent the man sprawling. Draven had been watching from a distance that night, unable to explain even to himself why he had felt the sudden, overwhelming need to check on her personally. When he saw the men closing in, something inside him, something he had been fighting to suppress since the night of the ceremony, broke free entirely. The confrontation was over in moments. The attackers, clearly untrained for a fight against an alpha king, fled into the trees, rather than risk their lives further. Draven shifted back, breathing hard, and turned to find Wren trembling against the stable wall, her eyes wide with shock. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with something that was not quite anger, and not quite fear, but close to both. She shook her head, unable to speak. He stepped closer, and for the first time since the ceremony, he allowed himself to really look at her, Not as a puzzle, not as a political problem, but as a person who had nearly been taken from a life she never even wanted. "I should have completed the binding that night," he said quietly. "I let my pride convince me I was protecting myself. Instead, I nearly cost you everything." "You didn't know," Ren whispered. "I should have trusted the goddess," Draven said. "And I should have trusted what I felt the moment that mark appeared on your hand, even if I refused to admit it." The following morning, Draven called the entire pack together, including Lord Voss and his daughter. He revealed everything Callum had uncovered: Ren's true bloodline, the attack near the stables, and the quiet investigation that pointed directly toward the Voss family's involvement. Lord Voss tried to deny it, but the evidence, along with the testimony of one of the fleeing attackers captured that same night, left no room for argument. Serafina, pale and shaking, said nothing in her family's defense. Whatever pride she still carried crumbled as she watched her father's schemes exposed before the entire pack. Draven turned to Ren, who stood at the edge of the crowd exactly as she had the night of the first ceremony, though everything about how the pack looked at her now was different. "I refuse to complete this binding once," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I will not make that mistake again." He walked to her and knelt, an act no Alpha King had performed in living memory, and took her marked hand gently in his own. "Ren Calloway," he said, "the moon goddess did not make a mistake. I did, by doubting her choice. If you are willing, I would like to complete what should have been finished under the stars 2 weeks ago, not because tradition demands it, but because I choose you." Ren looked down at him, at the mark on her palm that had changed her entire world, and felt something settle inside her that had been trembling since the night it first appeared. "I'm still just a kitchen girl," she said softly. "You are the last of a bloodline the goddess herself remembered," Draven said. "And you are the only person who has ever made me question everything I thought I understood about strength." Mother Ellen stepped forward once more, raising her arms beneath the same sky that had chosen Ren weeks earlier. This time, there was no confusion, no interrupted ceremony, no hesitation from the king. The moonlight gathered again, wrapping around them both, and the crescent mark on Ren's palm glowed brighter than it ever had before, as if the goddess herself approved of the path that had finally led them here. The Voss family lost their standing within the pack that same week, their influence stripped as punishment for their scheme. Serafina, humbled and quietly ashamed, chose to leave Silverfang to start somewhere new, away from the shadow of what her family had tried to do. Ren, meanwhile, stepped into a role she never imagined for herself, guided patiently by Mother Ellen and supported, day after day, by a king who no longer hid behind closed doors when it came to her. She was not perfect at it. She stumbled over formal customs, mixed up titles, and still occasionally wandered toward the kitchens out of habit. But the pack, slowly and then all at once, came to see what the goddess had seen from the very beginning: a heart strong enough to stand beside a king, not because of where she came from, but because of who she had chosen to become. And Draven, who had once refused to complete a ceremony out of fear and pride, learned that the truest strength a king could have was not in controlling every outcome, but in trusting the one choice he had not made himself, and loving it anyway.